Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Big Chill Podcast. This is episode 542, The State of German Football, with Raphael Honigstein. Hello, Big Chillians. Welcome back to the Big Chill Podcast. I'm Frank, joined as always with Eddie. Eddie, how's it going?
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying my time. You know, the start of the Masters, I get to be a TV patron for a few days, and I just love that.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, the pretentiousness of the Masters. Nothing better.
Yeah, an event like no other, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Event like no other. That's it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I like. There's parts of it that I obviously really enjoy, the history and the prestige and some of the customs, but it's just a little bit overboard at times. Yeah. Like,
well,
I like the no cell phone rule. I think a lot of sporting events could benefit from a no cell phone, no camera rule, and just having people be present in the moment. But
I like it from some aspects. So I like the fact that you can't take any videos and just hold your phone up, and like when Tiger's in the rough, there's not 500 people surrounding him with just their phones out, not even paying attention. But as someone who has gone to golf events a few times this year, it can get a little boring when you're there for 5, 6, 7 hours. And occasionally you might just want to check your phone and make sure you don't have any important emails or text messages you need to respond to. So that part of it is a little ridiculous. But I understand. I guess if you told me you could take away all of the idiots that constantly just film for 5 hours and it meant that I couldn't answer an email, I'd probably make that trade-off.
Also, just think about how much people must live for the ability to set an out-of-office auto reply of, I'll get back to you next week, I'm at Augusta. There, people
and
setting that.
Not even say the Masters. Just say, I'm at Augusta National.
Yes. Yeah. Currently chowing down on whatever that cheese sandwich is that they all lose their minds for.
A $1.50 pimento cheese sandwich. And that's the other thing I think, this is the other aspect of the Masters that bothers me, is they have, we've talked about before, but their food that they sell on the course is very, very cheap. So most sandwiches are anywhere from, I think, $1.50 to $4. A beer is only $5. A soda is like $2 or $3, like a normal price. That's great. But when you're paying about $750 to get into the event, I think it should be free food at that point.
Well, their argument would be that's the secondary market, right? Because the ticket to the Masters itself is pretty cheap if you get it through the proper channels. But yeah, the resale market, I mean, there are people paying upwards of sort of $4,000 a day this year for tickets. That might change when the rain comes. I think shifting those tickets for Saturday and Sunday, if it's a torrential downpour, might be a little bit tougher. But yeah, they would probably argue that, like, face value, everything's a bit more affordable than most other major sporting events.
I mean, I put one small bet on Max Homa to win, so that's thrown out the window as soon as I put that down. But I mean, all I hope is that on Sunday it's a good finish and you get to watch an exciting 2-3 hours of golf, because when you have a breakaway winner, while it is exciting that they're playing so well and they're so phenomenally ahead of everyone, it really doesn't make for great viewing. So
no,
that's all I really hope for.
That's why I also look forward to the prospect of bad weather on the Sunday as well, because that increases the possibility of someone having a bad hole. And I also think that's better, because it's also kind of dull when it's, well, he's got a one-shot lead, but realistically, like, parring the final 2 holes should be pretty easy. Might even sneak a birdie. When hey, these weather conditions mean that even if I just need a par, even if I just need a bogey on the 18th, I could conceivably mess this up. That's always better. I never get, I know you're not a bad weather football fan. I never understand the people who complain about bad weather in golf when you're watching professionals. I don't want to go out and play around in a torrential downpour, but I'm not some golf purist who's like, I need to see the very best shots all the time, otherwise it's not enjoyable.
I'll just no comment that, I guess, then. Maybe you should introduce our interview as well, Eddie. We didn't mention that
It's
at the top
true.
of the podcast.
It's true. Yeah. Coming up, we have a really great interview with Raphael Honigstein, who is a journalist and author. He currently writes for The Atlantic. He's the co-host of his own podcast. And now we had a really interesting discussion about Bayern Munich, the Bundesliga overall, Jurgen Klopp, the German national team. So really just got some great expertise and insights into the state of German football. And, it's nice when we're able to, we obviously like to have opinions on most things most of the time, but it's nice to get some real specialist expertise on to discuss topics in finer detail.
Yeah. I mean, and we cover a lot of European football, so it's not just, German national football or the Bundesliga. So that was exciting to kind of move around a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Strangely enough, we don't actually have any major European football updates, I guess, aside from last episode. We were talking about who would be the next Chelsea manager. You kind of jokingly threw out the prospect of Frank Lampard returning to Stamford Bridge. We were looking at the odds. He was 50-1 at the time, and he has now agreed. He has returned as the caretaker manager, the term that would be used in England. I guess you'd say interim in the US.
Yeah.
Unlikely.
Caretaker, like, I guess it probably doesn't have the same connotation, but to me, a caretaker would be like someone who like is really old and looks over a house that's crumbling and falling apart.
No, it's pretty similar. I mean, you might say
Okay.
caretaker for someone who's taking care of someone who's sick and stuff as well.
Yes, as well.
Yeah. But no, it's similar. But yeah, traditionally, yeah, it's the term that's always gets used. Someone who's in temporary charge, trying to make sure the things go smoothly until the permanent replacement is found. And yeah, that's Frank Lampard. It seemed Luis Enrique appears to be in quite advanced talks with Chelsea, so he's the likely full-time replacement, probably at the end of the season. But Lampard will see out the remainder of the season, see if he can get Chelsea's league form to improve. And I guess the really exciting thing for him is they're still in the Champions League. And it does raise the slight dilemma if he were to win the Champions League. And Chelsea have experienced this previously with Roberto Di Matteo. It's tough. I'm sure that they'll probably have some agreement in place with whoever the full-time replacement is anyway before the Champions League final occurs. But it will be difficult if he somehow does win the Champions League to ask him to then move along and someone else step into the fold.
Yeah, and I think, I guess my question though is, in the betting markets where it says Chelsea's next manager, are you now a winner with Frank Lampard or no?
I think it depends on the terms and conditions of the bookmaker. Usually they say permanent manager, and I think that's sometimes minimum number of games that they have to be in charge for. And so I think that depends. So some bookmakers, yes. Some bookmakers,
So we gotta
no.
hope he doesn't get sacked so soon.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you always run the risk that he might, if they come to some. I think it seems as if he'll be in charge until the end of the season. But yeah, I guess there's, depending on who they want to take charge on a full-time basis, maybe they might ask to be there before the season is finished. But other than that, it's a relatively slow sporting week.
Yeah, I guess when it's this slow, Eddie, we have to go all the way down to the Tucson Adult Beer League hockey. And we talked about this off podcast a little bit, but the roller hockey league that I'm in, the season has ended, and my team did not do very well in the playoffs. We had a very rough season. There is a team that I would say is basically like the Man City of our league and has probably the best talent and wins almost every year. But this year they lost in the semifinals. It was a very big upset that they lost and didn't even make it to the finals. upon that loss, I received a text message saying that I have, they are open to taking me on their team. So they have a spot open. Do I want to take the spot? And for me, I said, this makes me feel like Jack Grealish, the successful, young, handsome looking player who's, one of the best on his team, loved by the fans.
Probably not the brightest.
Yeah, but it's got a hell of jacked legs. And, whether I want to stay on the team that I'm probably a top 3 player and someone who's kind of relied upon to do well in tough situations, versus going to a team where out of the 8 players, I'm probably in the bottom 3 of that team, and I'm more of a role player, but can start to build my trophy case.
Just to clarify, how many players are on a team? 10?
Usually 8. No, 8.
Okay.
2 lines of 4.
So the top 3 to bottom 3 swing is not massive.
It's not massive, but it's a big difference, I think, to be like one of the guys who the team needs you to score versus one of the guys where, hey, look who scored. Okay, cool. Good job.
Yes. But as I said, I don't think the Jack Grealish comparison is particularly apt. I think
I just don't have the hair. You're right. I wish I did. Wish I could say I had the hair, but I don't.
No, I just think, he was undoubtedly the best player on his team. His team had virtually no prospects of winning anything. In fact, relegation was more likely than winning a trophy. And there's also different parallels. The incentives of going to City are also testing himself in a kind of tougher situation, making a lot more money. Neither of those factors are at play for you. I think
that the testing myself, can I enhance my game a little bit and step into
the same
the
league,
next
though.
level?
It's the same league.
So is the Premier League. It's the same league.
No, because he gets to play Champions League football. You've not got the
who
Champions
knows? Maybe
League.
If we win, we get to go to the semi-pro.
Okay, but I think there are more similarities in a sense with Harry Kane. Now, I guess the difference is Harry Kane is.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Harry Kane is without doubt the best player on his team. So when you're saying you're top 3 out of 8, I think that doesn't put you into Harry Kane territory. But in the sense that the big dilemma for you is, do you go elsewhere and possibly win? But in doing so, you will not get as much credit and probably might not get as much satisfaction. But if you stay on your team that's struggling a bit more and that you've been part of for a longer period of time, if they win, you get to feel as if it was because of you and not that you were just part of it.
It's very tough. It's a tough decision. But how amazing would it be if I go to the team that had now lost in the semifinals and I'm the one that brings them back into the championship and winning again? I was the missing piece.
Or
I'm the morale guy. I'm the morale guy at that point.
Imagine the scenario where at the end of this season, you're in the playoffs against your old team and it's you who doesn't score on the fast break and your old team goes through to the next round. That sounds much more like the Duke of Curse. Sounds, I mean, in a sense, I want to see the truest test of the Duke of Curse might be if you switch teams and if your other team suddenly wins the title and the team you join falls apart, we can put it entirely down to the Duke of Curse.
It'll be tough. I think ultimately I'm probably going to switch the tems just because we also talked off air that I'm much better friends. I'm much better friends with the other team. So not that I'm not friends with the team I play with.
No. I hope none of your current team members listen to this podcast.
I'll send them this clip. This is the motivation they need.
I
am never going to win with the Puck Knights. I am leaving them permanently. They're a bunch of losers.
What's the team's name?
The other team, you're going to love this. It's very Ted Lasso-y. They're blowing bubbles.
Oh, so like they're big West Ham fans?
No, the person who sponsors owns a scuba diving place.
I'll just say the Puck Knights is a better team name, but neither of those team names are great. with
But it's
all the
puck nights, like nights, like, and we play at
but,
night, so it's like the
yeah, it doesn't, whether it was with a K
and
or
then
without a K.
and then well the blowing the reason they're called blowing bubbles is because instead of having their name on the back, everyone's name just says Bubbles.
Neither of the
You
factors
get
that you've
it.
no, neither of the factors you've thrown in have made their team names better. I just think with the possibilities for good puns, and I expect a good pun in like a beer league team name, both have missed the boat, which I suppose is more ironic for blowing bubbles.
Yeah. Well, our Sunday team, Eddie, is called D's Nets. Is that better?
Yeah, it's better. I still don't love it, but it's definitely better. I just don't know how you include, like, you go for the puck in the team name and you don't really get a pun. That's the thing that surprises me.
Sorry, it was a cool jersey because it's got like a knight on it.
Well, there you go. You're
Yeah, I think we'll have to see now. This will be interesting to see how this season unfolds and what team reigns supreme now that I've left. But I love the Harry Kane comparison. I think that's pretty accurate.
It's extremely flattering for you.
Yeah,
but
or him, one or the other.
Now, we didn't, maybe to wrap things up before we move over to the interview, we didn't, whilst we discussed March Madness while it was going on, we didn't have any reaction to the Final Four or the ultimate winners of either the men's or the women's national championship games. There's obviously some controversy
I'm interested to see where you're going to go with this.
There's some controversy to discuss on the women's side.
Okay.
The men's side,
I knew it.
In the end, the best team in the Final Four won the tournament. The team everyone with UConn. Yep. I think not the best team in the nation, which is one of my issues I have with the March Madness format overall, is you put 64 teams in and it's just kind of a weird outcome, happens more frequently than it probably should. But I've got a question. You like to throw some little quiz questions at me. I've got a quiz question for you. How many current NBA players won a national championship in college?
Wow. Okay, hold on. Let me think of how many current NBA players there probably are, first off. Okay. 27.
Did you see this fact?
No.
Oh, because it is 27. So
no way. Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not kidding you. It's 27.
Wow. I'm completely honest. I did not see that fact at all. I was just gonna say 25, but I didn't want to be the boring person who says like a super like normal number, so I just bumped it up to 27.
Yeah, 27. The interesting thing about it is there are very few standout players when you kind of look through the list. Probably the only real superstar currently playing in the NBA who also won a national title in college is Anthony Davis, who won with Kentucky, has gone on to win an NBA title with the Lakers. Everyone else, you're kind of picking through a lot of, good NBA players, but not elite. And that's, to me, that's the other issue, in a sense, is success in March Madness in no way is a good predictor for success in the NBA. But moving away from the quiz, I guess we can then go on to some of the controversy in the women's tournament, which is more the reaction of the winning team, mostly surrounding, in a weird turn of events, the First Lady, Jill Biden, who has got herself into hot water on 2 counts. One, seemingly the standard invitation to attend the White House as reigning national champions might potentially be turned down on the basis that Jill Biden, I think, in a throwaway attempt to just be a nice person congratulating both teams, is my take on it. Perhaps you will disagree. Said that maybe Iowa should also be invited to the White House because they'd played so well. I don't think that was a slight on LSU. I think there is some, understandably perhaps, racial elements that are being implied in as to why when you had a team that had a white superstar and quite a lot of white players versus an LSU team that was mostly non-white. But I just took it as her trying to, like a person who doesn't watch sports, probably just, hey, they both played a great game. They should both be allowed to come. I can at least understand why some LSU players have got a bit annoyed. The thing that they already reacted to before they even won it with Jill Biden, they didn't allow her to come into the locker room before the game, the national championship, which was one of the things she was going to do, come in and speak to both teams. And their reason for not allowing her to come in was because when she picked her bracket, she didn't pick them to win the title. That's Ted Lasso style overreaction to people making preseason predictions.
I think we were on same wavelengths today, because when I read this same article, I thought we're going to have to take down our bashing of Ted Lasso a little bit, because some of these dumb storylines do actually exist in real life. I couldn't believe that when I read that. Yeah, it is so ridiculous that you would turn down. I'll say this: I am not someone who, like, if I met the president, I would be like, "Oh my god, I met the president." But at the same time, if the president want to come and, like, be where I was, like, if the president said, "Hey, I'm going to come to the university, I want to meet with these 4 people," and I'm one of them, I'd be extremely flattered, and in no way would I say no. Do you know what I mean? But I wouldn't go out of my way to, like, drive to DC if he had an hour of, like, a book signing and I could be on the list or whatever. It just blows my mind that they would say no because they did not pick them to win the national. Do you think Joe Biden, and for that matter, Joe Biden, do you think he even knows what a basketball is anymore? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean,
do you think he knows who he picked at that point?
Well, that would always
No.
be the interesting thing to me to be, do they even make the picks themselves? Or do you go to, I'm sure Obama did because he liked basketball. So he was probably watching college basketball throughout the season when he had time, or at least following it to some degree. So there, again, I wouldn't see Obama not picking my team as a slight, but you could say, hey, he genuinely doubted us. But yeah, in the case of Joe Biden or Jill Biden, they didn't sit down and really go through, like, well, okay, this team lost 4 games, but let's look through the value of the wins they had. There's just, I went to Iowa once. Better, I guess they'll win. Oh, my grandson, he applied to LSU but didn't get in, so I'm going to have them losing. There's the reasons why they pick their brackets are going to be just as dumb as the reasons why the rest of us do. So to take any offense, it makes you look ridiculous. And the shame for them is, in a way, they could have maybe made something that resembled a solid argument as to why they were so upset about her offering, or a kind of empty, hollow offer of Iowa also getting a White House visit. But when you combine their reaction to her saying that with the fact that they wouldn't let her come into the locker room because of the bracket selection, it just makes them look like petty assholes. And so you lose the high ground, and that's what bothers me.
Yeah, and I mean, what I read from this whole thing is that they are that team that we've talked about before, that is a good team that likes to create this false chip on their shoulder, and that no one believed in them, and no one thought they could do anything, and no one thought they would do this and that, and here they are against all odds. Like, okay, enough is enough. Like, you weren't the 15th seed, like, you were a high seeded team. People clearly thought you were a good team. You can't pull this "no one believed in us" card. And that was, and I mean, you could see just in the way, I mean, what the other major thing is, Angel Reese, who is the star for LSU, has been very vocal about the whole Biden situation, but she was also the one who was kind of doing the John Cena "you can't see me" to the Iowa player Clark, who had been doing it all tournament, or at least the last few games that she had been playing in and had been televised for. And there you could clearly see it was like just they were using that as motivation of like, no one believes in us, no one respects us. Like, Clark never did it to them. If anything, she was doing it to other opponents in previous games. Never once did she do this to any LSU players. So the fact that they're going to use this as motivation kind of shows that they're a team that will cling on to anything as a way to like, see, look, we're so disrespected because Clark's doing it to a different opponent. Like, they don't respect us either. You know, like it's dumb. It's very petty.
Yeah, when she wouldn't have even probably have expected to play LSU at any point in the tournament. You know, like there was no reason for them to expect that was going to be the matchup that they would have. But no, it makes them look bad. And I guess on the men's side of things, obviously UConn won their
Well, yeah, I want one more thing.
Okay, go for it.
I'll get on my soapbox a little bit for that thing, because there has been a lot of controversy that Angel Reese has gotten a lot of heat for doing that to Caitlin Clark, right? I'm pretty sure that's the name, right?
Yeah, Caitlin Clark, yeah.
Yeah. And how when Caitlin Clark did it, people loved it and no one thought it was disrespectful. And like, you know, saying this is a whole racial, you know, like disparity and the judgment and things like that. For me, it has like absolutely nothing to do with that. It's the complete circumstance of the situation. And I think David Portnoy actually got like roasted on this because he had a similar take that I think that I had is maybe I won't be nearly as aggressive as Portnoy. I won't be nearly aggressive as him because I think he was like cursing about it and everything. But there's a difference when a player does a celebration that's more aimed at like her teammates and her fans. Like when you score a goal, you're not celebrating in front of your opponent. You're celebrating with your team, with your fans. And that, I'm not the hugest fan of that. I think play the game and that's it, like whatever. But I'm okay with it. Like you're not disrespecting anybody by doing that. And that, for the most part, is what Caitlin Clark was doing during her games. There was not very much disrespect directed towards other teams. But when you not only direct it towards an opposing player, but do it after the game ends, when you've already won, that is as petty as it gets. And that is ultimately the ultimate poor sportsmanship. Like, even if it was during the game, you say like, all right, come on, that's like disrespectful, but whatever. Like maybe your trash talk is what puts you over the edge a little bit. But after you've won the game and for 5 seconds, you're circling her like a shark, like imitating her and making fun of her and pointing at your like ring finger and talking shit. Like, you won. Who cares? Be a good sport. You won. Go celebrate with your team. You don't need to still trash talk someone who like wasn't even trash talking you to begin with. Like that is so low level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw that the comparison in a sense was during the recent World Cup, which, you know, Argentina faced a backlash when they knocked the Netherlands out on penalties, where their reaction was less celebratory in terms of their achievement, but more the pleasure they took out of the kind of disappointment of their opponents. And that's the same thing. Like, you've just achieved the biggest success,
and I was consistent on that.
Yeah. But if you're an LSU player, you've just achieved the biggest success of your basketball playing career, maybe the biggest success you ever achieve as an athlete, and to have part of that focus be on the failure of your opponent, especially when there's a very good chance that opponent is going to go on to have a much better career than you anyway. You know, that's the other element of kind of maybe knowing your stature a little bit. And I think you do need to know that, right? Like, if you're playing against Messi and you win and you're kind of a sort of also ran to go and celebrate in Messi's face, makes you look extra stupid. Not to call Caitlin Clark Messi, but, you know, there's a good chance she turns out to be one of the best players in women's basketball. But
well, Angel Reese is really good too. Like, I, you know, don't want to rip on her for not being good, but
I'm not ripping on her for not being good. I
completely agree with you, though.
But I think they're on different levels. One is being talked about as potentially changing the game of women's basketball, and the other was just one of the better players on the team that won the national title. You know, like, that's a different kind of stratosphere to be in. But final thoughts, I guess, before we move on to the interview. Just my only takeaway: UConn men's team, they won their 5th national title. A couple of years ago, their head coach kind of made headlines after he was knocked out after they were knocked out for saying, "You better take advantage of us now because we're coming for you. Like, you know, we're going to be better. Our time will come," kind of thing. I thought it was stupid at the time. I think it's even stupider that I've then had to listen to people bring that up as if he's Nostradamus. I mean, he's obviously going to say his team's going to get better. That's the role of the coach. I also want to say UConn have no really good wins on their CV from this national title run. So I don't even think you prove that, like, you better take advantage of us now. In winning this national title, the highest seed they beat was a 5 seed. They beat 3 5 seeds. So they got that going for them. And then, oh no, so they beat a 3 seed. Gonzaga was a 3 seed. So they got a 3 seed, 3 5 seeds, an 8 seed, and a 14 seed.
Hey, you can only beat the team that you're facing, Eddie.
You can, but you didn't exactly run the gauntlet. Like, I don't think you've emphatically proven, like, we're the best team and we're here to stay. You had a nice run. You know, it's like going back to the England in, say, the 2018 World Cup. Great to make it to the semifinal, but England didn't prove that they were one of the 4 best teams in the world by beating, you know, Sweden and Colombia. You know, it doesn't. And
I will say though, like you said, the coach said, you know, we'll be back, take advantage of us now. If you're a UConn fan, you've had some pretty decent success in like the last 25 years. You'd be happy to be a UConn fan. So you've won in 99, then you won in 04, then you won in 2011, then you won in 2014, then you won in 2023. Like that's a pretty consistent, you know, like if I were a fan, I would love to have that. You know, you've won 5 national championships in 25 years. Like that's pretty good. And they're not all just, you know, 4 or 5 years in a row. They're kind of spread out. So you go through some highs and lows. You hate your team for a little bit and then you love them again and you get disappointed. You know, it's not like England. You're not just constantly getting disappointed.
Although, how pissed off are you if you happen to go through your entire time at UConn in the, like, one of those periods where they didn't win a national title? Like, you could have fit your whole degree in and just never have been there for the national title win.
That would suck.
But yeah, on that note, talking about success, dominance, failure, down periods, maybe it's the perfect opportunity for us to turn things over to our interview. Well, welcome back, and we're now delighted to be joined by this week's guest, Raphael Honigstein, staff writer at The Athletic, also co-host of the Beer and Honey podcast, I guess one of the sort of authorities on German football. So Raphael, Raf, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for your very kind introduction.
Yes. So I guess I know this is a topic that you've discussed pretty extensively, perhaps even exhaustively over the past few days and, well, I guess week or so. But seeing as you are one of the leading experts on German football, it would be a shame to not have you on and maybe have the starting topic be the situation with Bayern Munich and what led to the sacking of Nagelsmann, which I think came as a surprise to most people. From your perspective, was it a total surprise? And exactly what were the events that led up to Bayern Munich deciding they needed to change their manager?
The timing was a surprise because they had these huge games coming up. It's the last third of the season. You thought, okay, Bayern have some problems, they're inconsistent, but are they really going to make some huge changes for these games coming up? I think the fact that Thomas Tuchel was available made Bayern hasten that decision and perhaps find a courage to do what their conviction told them to do, which is to really make that change. I think without Thomas Tuchel being available, I think Nagelsmann probably sees out the season, even if those doubts and those concerns would have never been quite alleviated. It's not a big mystery in a sense because Bayern felt that the performances, the results, especially in the league, were pointing towards a bad ending. just as they had last season, where they got knocked out in the Champions League quarterfinals, and they were no longer in the cup, and they just kind of limped on to win the championship, but they didn't have much competition at the time. This time it's different with Dortmund having found more consistency. So it wasn't a sense of Nagelsmann losing the dressing room, having a huge argument with his superiors, being terribly bad as a coach. More sort of a slow burning process which started already in the second half of last season. And those concerns, those doubts, this feeling, the sense that him and the team are not quite on the same wavelength tactically, maybe also in terms of the emotional bond that didn't really exist between him and too many of the players. Bayern felt that things were only heading for one way, which is down. And I think the unique thing about Bayern is, and I can't stress this enough, this is really important to understand, unlike most clubs, they are not prepared to give coaches the benefit of the doubt and say, look, he's won last year, let's give him this year. And then in the third year, maybe he'll be fine again. No, they will fire you as soon as they feel performances are dropping, chances of winning stuff decrease. So if you look back at the last 12 years, Louis van Gaal takes Bayern close to winning a treble, gets fired in the second season. Niko Kovac fired in the second season after winning the league in his first. Carlo Ancelotti, same thing. So these are just three coaches in the last 11 years that had the same story. So in a way, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big surprise. The surprise was, I think, the timing.
So then talking about how it is actually a sort of normal process for them, with standards and expectations being so high, I mean, winning the Bundesliga is sort of taken for granted almost. Is the Bayern job almost a bit of a kind of poison chalice in that, I mean, you have to be probably winning the Champions League, every other year almost to be able to stand out as a Bayern Munich manager?
Yes and no. Winning the league, as you said, is just the bare minimum, and no one's really going to erect any statues outside Allianz Arena if you do that. Not winning it is a disaster and totally unacceptable. But there are degrees of failure, if you want to call it that. I mean, Pep Guardiola getting to the semi-finals 3 times in a row in the Champions League was not seen as a failure. Bayern, especially in that last year, were very, very unlucky. Were probably the best team in Europe. And Bayern would have liked to stick with him if they'd had a chance to do so. The same with Hansi Flick, who in his second season got knocked out by PSG, but it was his falling out with a sporting director that really ended his time there rather than anything to do with the team or with his performances. So yes, the expectations are ridiculously high. On the other hand, you go to Bayern, you're guaranteed almost to win stuff. And you come away being a winner. And you come away having worked with some of the best players in Europe, and you come away having beaten some of the best teams in Europe if things go according to plan. So it still does enhance your CV, and you can see now from the offers that are coming Julian Nagelsmann's ways that it hasn't really hurt him. The fact that things ended prematurely and that he didn't win the Champions League in his first season. Who knows? He might have had a real good shot this season if Bayern persisted with him. So, poison chalice, yes, in a way. At the same time, it is quite a golden cage that you live in. So, it is quite... it's a comfortable misery, shall we say, to face that kind of pressure.
Now, do you think that the sharpness that they have, do you think that creates any hesitation for managers to want to take that job? Or do you think, like you're saying, you're still going to get some accolades from it, that it's going to help you down the line no matter what, that there is no hesitation to take that job with such a potential short leash?
Yeah, I can't think of too many coaches apart from actually Tuchel in 2018 who Bayern targeted in the end didn't get. And I think the reason is that they offer a pretty persuasive package. You earn a lot of money. You live in a very beautiful city. You have the best team, so your chances of winning stuff are sort of 75%. to begin with. And you have a realistic shot of winning the Champions League. And that's been the situation now for 10 years in a row. I don't think too many teams, with the exception of, let's say, Real Madrid for sure, but even then, I'm not sure there's a second team over those last 10 years that went into the Champions League season thinking we have a realistic shot of winning every single year. I don't think any of the other sides I can think of at the top of my head have had that consistency. Liverpool only started with Klopp. Man City, of course, only started with Guardiola. Man United have been not really a factor in the Champions League. Chelsea are very up and down. Barcelona, not really a factor for the second half of the last decade. So it doesn't leave that many options. So for all the drawbacks and perhaps a sense of predictability of who's going to win the league, Bayern still offers a lot of stuff that people who work in football are interested in. And that's also the reason why players keep coming there. I think from the outside looking in, you think surely they want to test themselves in a stronger league or at a different club where they have to fight more. But players, just like more normal employees, don't think like that. They think, where can I get paid lots of money and where can I have a really good chance of succeeding and winning stuff? And there just aren't that many clubs that can offer what Bayern can at a pretty high level.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously they're not failing to attract big name managers. I guess maybe as a final question relating to Nagelsmann and his time at Bayern Munich, I know in being linked to the Chelsea job, one of the reasons why they're a bit skeptical is his age. Was his age and lack of experience in any way an issue at Bayern Munich?
I'm not sure the age was such an issue. It's more, I think, his immaturity and lack of experience at this level. I think at Leipzig he didn't really have those problems. Certainly at Hoffenheim he didn't have those problems, having been promoted as a youth coach. I think Bayern is a different beast. You have a different dressing room, bigger egos, players who've worked with some of the best coaches in the world. And I think Nagelsmann failed to appreciate that as a Bayern coach, you are under the spotlight much more than being at Hoffenheim at Leipzig. And it doesn't stop and doesn't start and end with what you do on the training pitch or what you wear in training. People look at the kind of stuff you wear on the touchline. People look at the car you drive, the motorcycle you drive, the skateboard you drive, and they're deducting that somebody who is making such a big effort to put himself in a certain light is doing that because they have a certain sense of self-centeredness and perhaps vanity, which in itself is fine. And most coaches, I'm sure, have a really vain streak. Certainly Guardiola had at Bayern. But I think you have to do it in a way that doesn't lose the respect of the players and of his superiors. And I think at times he said things where the club felt this isn't really what we expect from a Bayern Munich manager. I don't think these things ultimately mattered, but because he failed to find the results and the performances that the team expected in sense of the quality that's at his disposal, then these things kind of start to weigh against you and become a factor. So I don't think there's a causation or there's a causal connection between what he wears on the touchline and Bayern not playing well. But when Bayern don't play well, these other things then become part of the conversation. So I think he would have learned from that and be a little bit perhaps more low-key and putting the team first and trying to perhaps be more of a team player, which is something I think that at a team like Bayern you have to listen very closely to what the team are telling you and what the mood in the dressing room is like. And I think he was perhaps a little bit too technocratic in his approach, thinking that the right tactics will just bring out the best of his team and everything else is kind of not really important.
Well, I guess maybe speaking there a little bit about...
Stop pushing your ageism agenda, Eddie.
Well, it's always depressing to see, managers who are younger than you. But
I was going to say, stop being jealous.
Yeah, I think there's a high degree of envy. But talking about maybe the state of the Bundesliga then overall, and a little bit of element, that culture, do you think in the long term, Bayern's continued dominance is dangerous for the sort of health of the Bundesliga overall, and maybe perhaps even the interest in it? And is there any possibility of them relinquishing that stranglehold on German football anytime soon?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that it's not healthy for the league. Everyone's excited this season because there is a genuine title race, at least until mid-April. So that's a novelty. That's something that is exciting, that pushes Bayern, that makes Bayern nervous, as you see, and that creates more excitement and people care what's happening. And of course, any sporting competition needs that sense of you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And the league is much better for it. Domestically, I'm not sure it makes that much of a difference because the German market is dominated by people who watch their teams. And if you're a Köln fan, if you're a Hamburg fan in the second division, if you're a Bayern fan, if you're a Dortmund fan, you don't watch according to the outcome of the league. You watch because this is what you do. You watch your team, whether they're winning or losing. It doesn't really make a difference. You might get a few more neutrals tuning in when there's a title race, or fans from other clubs now watching, the bigger games of the bigger teams because they want to know what the title race will bring. But it doesn't really change the equation. Where, of course, it gets more difficult is selling the product abroad. You need to have at least two teams who are fighting. That's the experience in Spain in recent years. And, of course, Atletico have broken that to a certain extent, that duopoly. Italy has really rebounded strongly, benefited from that much more open contest that we've seen in recent years. So, yeah, it would be better. But I think would even be helped by the fact that Dortmund just winning the odd title here and there would just help. It doesn't have to necessarily be head-to-head, 1 year Bayern, 1 year Dortmund. It's unrealistic when you consider Bayern's financial position and Dortmund's financial position. Bayern always have a head start. But if Dortmund had won, let's say, in 2018, when they had a real chance with Niko Kovac being a very weak manager, if perhaps they would have taken advantage this year, although they've done as well as they could have done in the second half. In the first half, they dropped too many points. Then we might be having a different conversation. But in the long run, what the Bundesliga needs above all is to have recognizable brands that people outside Germany are interested in. So Bayern have a massive following, and their following is probably bigger than it ever was. Not despite the league being a foregone conclusion, but perhaps because it is, because they're winning stuff and that's attractive to people and they become Bayern fans. So, but it's only one club. We need more than that. We need the equivalent of people also following Liverpool and following Arsenal and following Chelsea and following perhaps Man City. We don't have enough of that. Dortmund have a presence internationally and they have a following, but it's not the same level as Bayern. And then below them, there's a long, long gap, and there's absolutely no one really within 50 feet of them. So that's where we need to grow. And it's hard to see where that's going to come from, because the organic setup of the Bundesliga with a very tight restrictions on outside investment and what you can and can't do to grow a club, it shows it's not impossible to do, as the fine examples of Freiburg, Union Berlin, and Frankfurt would show. It can be done, but it takes a lot of time. And it's always quite fragile, because you just need a couple of bad seasons and then you're back in the queue again, because you don't have enough guaranteed income to become part of the established elite. So there is no real good answer, because within German football, people are very reluctant to change. They they value that organic connection, that accountability that comes with member-controlled clubs above a sense of competition and these dreams that English fans have that my club will one day be bought by Sheikh from Abu Dhabi and I can also win the Champions League. German supporters, for them, that's a dystopia rather than a dream.
Which makes sense. I'm a Blackburn Rovers supporter, so I've experienced the Jack Walker time of the amazing things that money can do, and then also an ownership, family who didn't realize you could be relegated from the Premier League. So, sort of had both experiences. You say there's a reluctance there. Is there any possibility you've referred there to the 50+1 rule? Is there any possibility of that ever being changed in a sense, in an effort to try and open the league up to more parity?
I think it's possible. People are kind of chewing away at it. There has been certain exemptions granted, like Leverkusen and Wolfsburg, who are owned by their parent companies for historic reasons. There's a mechanism by which if you support a club for 20 years straight with a certain amount of money, you can then take over the whole club. So you can, if you take a lot of time, do that within the confines then of the licensing system. And of course, financial fair play might play a role as well if you want to play in Europe. You have clubs that pay lip service to it, but are not really 50+1 compliant, like RB Leipzig. Hoffenheim would be a similar case, although that's changing now with Dietmar Hopp giving back his shares to the club. So it's, on the one hand, it's hard to see how the consensus will hold in the face of so many exemptions and so many kind of clubs that are trying to circumvent the system or at least bend the rules. At the same time, the grassroots and the supporters are really reluctant, or I should say hostile, to any more wholesale changes. And I think the clubs themselves will be very reluctant to push for it. So it's hard to see where the change will come from, at least in the medium future. The most realistic possibility is somebody actually going to court. We've had Hanover try that. They haven't really succeeded. But eventually somebody might say, look, I want to buy a football club. Why can't I do it? Isn't that crazy that I can't buy a club when I can buy everything else? But it hasn't happened yet.
So you talked a little before about the maybe lack of support of some of the other clubs. And when I think of the U.S., I actually feel like there's a lot of support for Dortmund among U.S. fans who watch Bundesliga. I think in part due to Dortmund being able to attract some young American talent and having that kind of develop and grow there. So for, I guess, people who aren't so familiar, how are Dortmund so good at not only securing and attracting young talent, but actually like scouting for all these young talent and consistently bring in younger players that have huge impacts and then, continue on to then, be superstars and move up the ranks throughout other clubs?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. First of all, they just have very capable people, and they've had them now for a while. They've had people like Sven Mislintat there, or the chief scout, Marcus Pilava, who's just gone to Bayern. They're people that just understand what a good player is, and they perhaps see them more quickly or at an earlier stage than others. But more importantly, Dortmund have a track record of giving these young players game time and helping them develop. And now they're in a position already for a few years where the best players, and everyone knows who these are, everyone knows who Jude Bellingham is already at 16, and he already could have gone everywhere in the world. But Dortmund now in a position where agents and the parents of children know that Dortmund is sort of the best place often if you are a teenager who wants to take that first step. And the reason for that is because they occupy a very specific space in the football ecosystem. They're not a small club. They're sort of the 12th, 13th richest club in Europe. They have a huge stadium. There's sort of more or less guaranteed Champions League football every year unless something goes dramatically wrong, because they are the second biggest team, maybe third in terms of quality at times with Leipzig. But they will always finish top four. And they have a team that is good, but not so good that you don't have a chance of it as a young player coming in. So all these things make for a very productive environment for these kind of players. And increasingly, Dortmund don't have to do much because these guys get offered to them. You have the agents calling up and say, look, we're thinking about the next step. We're in the under 19s at Man City, but we know going to City is going to be hard and so on. Where should we go? What should we do? Do you want to take us on? And then if Dortmund feel the player is good enough, he's going to Dortmund because they've done it now for so many years with so many players. And of course, you know that when you play at Dortmund for a couple of years, it's going to have much more effect than going to a top Premier League side and getting loaned out to a lower Premier League side or even to the Championship where you might get lost in, some terrible football with terrible players around you. So Dortmund offer this pathway that that is hugely attractive for these kind of players.
Well, maybe speaking of that Dortmund pathway, then you literally wrote the book on Jurgen Klopp, and that happened to coincide with a tremendous period of success for him. He's now maybe experiencing one of the most challenging periods of his career in terms of the issues at Liverpool and how they'll be able to resolve them. Based on the insights that you gathered during the process of writing that book, how well do you think he relishes the challenges he's currently facing at Liverpool? And do you think that's then a project that he wants to be part of long term, even if it's not just year after year success?
I don't think anyone relishes being so far away from your own ambitions and goals, especially when you came so close last year to have the best season ever in English football to now struggling to get into the European places, let alone the Champions League. I don't think it's a very enjoyable process. Fans are unhappy. The whole red half of the city is unhappy. The dressing room, is not happy when you're not winning or when you lose big. So I don't think it's fun. I don't think it's expected either because they came so close last year, and in their mind they have strengthened. Perhaps not as much as you wanted to. Perhaps not really getting the kind of midfield reinforcement that would have done a lot of good for this team. But still, big players coming in, more quality coming in. They'd lost Mane, but when you look at the players that they have at their disposal, it shouldn't be that much of an issue. So it seems that Klopp maybe underestimated the size of the drop-off this season and the size of the problems. And I kind of sympathize because you have players like Van Dijk and Fabinho who are just not the same level. And I don't think there were any indications to believe that they would drop so much. I don't think you really can plan for that. You have Fabinho being one of the best defensive midfielders in Europe, and then suddenly he's a complete ghost, and you're thinking, I need two players rather than one to replace him. I don't think anyone could have expected that. So, but at the same time, maybe one or two other players should have been replaced earlier, or there should be more competition. And I think they will draw the right conclusions. And the beauty of this Liverpool situation is that his methods and his position is beyond doubt. He's shown that he can win things. He's shown that he knows how to coach a team. And I think the only problem is that the team needs a bit of freshening up. And luckily, he's in a position to do that. That's never been the case before. When things became a bit stale at Mainz, there wasn't anything to do, and he had outgrown the club anyway. When things became a little bit stale at Dortmund, they didn't have the money to refresh the team, so they had to go down the route of changing the manager and introducing new ideas. And he was the first one to actually realize that and accept that, even though it hurt everyone. I think in Liverpool is a different situation. They will give him the time. They will give him the license to make changes. And I think he does not want to leave on a low. He wants to leave on a high. And I think he believes that with a few tweaks, there's still a lot to be won with this team. And I'm sure he's going to develop that hunger again because it's bigger than any sense of fear of failure, I think, in him.
When you watch Liverpool, Klopp has a very like a good presence on the pitch, clear personality, and even when he's doing interviews, is that the same type of personality that you see behind the scenes? Is he the same type of person when you see him on television as he is, behind the scenes?
Yes and no. I think he understands that it's a job to do, speaking to journalists, that sometimes he finds it hard to control emotions, and the first person he talks to, he uses them almost to vent his emotions and get a lot of frustration out, and then you can be on the receiving side of some undeserving, harsh words. But he's calmed down a lot in that respect, and I think he controls himself more, knowing that he needs to present the club and not say things that he'll regret afterwards. And also, I think project that confidence and project that optimism that things will change. I think that's important. You need to look in control. You need to look as if you have all the answers. You need to look as if you know that if we do this, then we're going to have better results, better performances. And I think by now people realize that this is not an act, that he actually does believe he's got the right answers. And when they fail for whatever reason, it's not because there's a problem with the system or the ideas are wrong. It's just the implementation wasn't quite right. And I think that's something that he is also quite protective about. So when you ask these big questions about, is the system perhaps become too predictable? Do they need a plan B? Should they change? Then he becomes very defensive and very upset, because I think he wants to avoid this discussion becoming part of the dressing room dialogue, that somehow the players themselves start wondering, is this still the right way? Should we perhaps play differently? I think he's found in the past that can be very corrosive and very detrimental. So he always reacts very strongly when somebody asks these fundamental questions, because to him, it's always about putting the plan into work properly, because the plan does work. And he's shown that over 20 years, and we just need to get it right on the pitch. Don't ask me about changing things, about playing differently. It's not going to happen with me. And don't get these ideas into players' heads that we should play differently, because it's not going to happen.
Have you ever been on the receiving end of that venting?
I've been lucky in a sense; it hasn't been too bad. I've had one or two moments with him, but nothing compared to what some of my colleagues have endured. I'm always also trying to be quite sensitive. So when they lose and you can see that he's very down, you don't want to necessarily kind of poke him too much and revel in the pain. And you start with a pretty soft question to more kind of listen, and rather than make it an interrogation, which isn't really the right way with him. And he reacts quite badly if you're taking a kind of aggressive sort of political stance. It's still only football, and it's not a serious thing. And you just have to sometimes respect that players and managers feel very badly, and perhaps don't need you to point out all the things that have gone wrong, because they know themselves. And that's more painful than anything you can ask them.
Maybe transitioning then from a club in a little bit of a crisis to a national team going through a bit of a crisis. You also wrote a book on how German football sort of reinvented itself leading up to the success in 2014, Das Reboot, which I think is one of the better book titles of relating to a sports book in a long, long time.
You take all my jokes.
Since then, things haven't gone so well for Germany. Obviously, back-to-back exits in the group stages of World Cups, which was I guess almost inconceivable in 2014, and also the exit in the Euros relatively early on to England. How would you compare the low points of now for German football to the sort of low point when the reinvention that you started to describe began?
Yeah, it's two different types of crises. The one around the turn of the century was about no longer producing players. We were looking around Europe, and everyone seemed to have technical players, wingers, number 10s, and Germany only had holding midfielders. Some really good holding midfielders and some good defenders, but with the exception of Michael Ballack and Sebastian Deisler, none of these players that really get your pulse racing. And why wasn't Germany producing these players? And I think the lessons that have been learned then are still filtering through now, and we still have perhaps not quite as many, but we have a pretty decent pool of players who play at the highest level, play for the best teams in the world, and when you put them all together, they should be pretty competitive. So it's not a fundamental crisis in the sense that we don't have these players anymore, and there's something really wrong with German football. I think this is much more on a sort of micro level. Löw outstayed his welcome. He should have been sacked or left much earlier. 2018 was a disaster of his making mostly. 2021 certainly had his fingerprints all over it by the way he set up the team and really playing below their possibilities. 2022 is harder, I think, to categorize because it wasn't a disaster in terms of performances. They had 20 bad minutes against Japan. Unfortunately, those 20 bad minutes was enough to exit the tournament in one of the less forgiving groups. Flick needs to learn very quickly and needs to get a grip. But I still feel that there is no reason why come next year we won't have a competitive team fighting for the title. I don't see any scenario where Germany will not have a team that you would consider one of the favorites to win. Maybe not the favorite. They're not at France's level. Maybe they're not even at England's level. But just below them, I think Germany, for all their problems, will be there, because as long as you have players like Musiala, Havertz, Wirtz, Gnabry, Sané, Kimmich, Goretzka, you will be competitive. And yes, some positions could be better. And yes, we don't have the strongest centre-backs in the world, perhaps at the moment. But then your job as a team is to find reasons to negate your weaknesses. And I think that's where Flick failed, because he didn't really address the imbalance between attack and defense. He was too gung-ho, and Germany paid the price for it in pretty frustrating circumstances. But it was unnecessary, because they certainly were the best team against Japan for 70 minutes and should have won the game 3 or 4-0 easily. But it was one of those things. So I'm not as pessimistic as others are. I think we've come a long way from the really dark times. Now it's just making sure that you use this potential, which is considerable, and use it well. But that's more a question of the management rather than wholesale reform, in my view.
And then if you say you're not as pessimistic as some, then do you think overall in Germany there is a sort of rational response to this period of relative failure in the sense of being able to understand that consistent success is probably not something that you can expect? You can't just, pencil yourselves in for the quarterfinals or semifinals of every major tournament and win occasionally.
I think you should. I think that should be the minimum requirement for German football. It used to be that semifinals were seen as the minimum requirement. So I don't think the expectations are wrong. The reactions, of course, are never rational. That's just the nature of football. So people then start talking about, some kind of knee-jerk stuff. The players shouldn't live in 5-star accommodation. They should go to a hostel and sleep in bunk beds, and that will teach them. But it's all nonsense, really. It's all nonsense. Just sort out your rest defense and have some more protection for the back four, and things will look different. It's people like football as a morality play. So if you win, it's because you are pure, you are noble, you are superior, you are courageous, you have more mental strength. If you lose, it's because you're the opposite of all of that. It's because you're weak. It's because you are lacking in focus. It's because you're not serious enough. And of course, sometimes that can be the explanation, but more often than not, it's not really the most pressing issue, especially if you have players in this case who have won the Champions League, who've won big trophies, and there's no reason why playing for Germany suddenly they should go from being the most resilient and mental tough players to players who can't deal with the challenge of playing for Germany and playing against Japan. So I don't buy it. I don't buy that. And the emotions will always be we'll be strong with the national team. That's the beauty and the curse, if you will, of playing for this side. But I'm optimistic that better days are ahead. And just to go back to what we talked about earlier, I think before too long we'll also see a certain Jurgen Klopp coaching the national team, and I think that promises to be a pretty exciting ride. We might have to wait a little bit longer, but I think before the 20s are over, we'll see him in charge, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
Do you say that based on the fact that the German Federation really want him, or on the fact that you know that that's a career goal of his, or perhaps both?
Yeah, I think it's both. Maybe it's too strong to say it's a career goal of him, but I think it's a hugely attractive job, and I think it would suit a perhaps slightly different, less frantic lifestyle. With the coaching the national team, the pressure comes very intense every other year or so, but in between you have 3 months where you do absolutely nothing. And I think after the treadmill of the Premier League and especially the COVID years and how tough it was for him to shoulder all the responsibility of a club like Liverpool, he'd be very open to a change of rhythm in that sense. And certainly the German FA would love him because irrespective of Flick being there, he is still the number one coach of his generation, and would also immediately boost the popularity of the national team and of the German FA, because that's been another problem that they've had in recent years, that they're sort of disliked. And with Klopp at the helm, you'd look a lot better and attract a lot more sponsors. So it's definitely a goal for the German FA to get him into that job at some point, and I'm sure he'd be open to it. Not just yet, but I think it won't take that much longer.
So then looking forward, I guess, in the next Euro competition and next World Cup, what would be your realistic predictions for Germany moving forward?
Well, at the moment, it's hard to be that optimistic because we just saw some poor games, especially against Belgium, and you feel, oh my God, this is going to be bad. But then you need to remember important players weren't playing. There was no Ilkay Gundogan, there was no Müller, there was no Rüdiger at the back. You also always have one or two players who no one thinks or talks about suddenly having a fantastic second half of the season next year, and they're in contention to go to the Euros. I'm thinking of players like Robin Gosens, David Raum, who nobody really talked about before they got called up. And I'm sure we're going to see one of those players suddenly emerge and be a big factor. For the players that I mentioned before, especially Jamal Musiala, if he continues to develop, I think Germany have a decent shot at getting at least to the semi-final, maybe even win the competition. I don't see why that shouldn't happen. They need to raise their game. They need to be more consistent. Hansi Flick needs to, I think, change his coaching and be a lot more decisive in his decision making. But if these things can happen, if the big players are all healthy and in good form going into the competition, I'd say Germany will be among the teams that can win this thing.
I guess following on from that as my last question, and then Frank, I'll give you the honor of the final question of the interview. But speaking of up-and-coming German players, there's extremely high expectations for Moukoko at Dortmund. What are your views in terms of, where does the potential stretch for him? And is there almost too much pressure on someone who, in a sense, since he was 15, 16, people were thinking of being one of the next big things in European football?
Well, I think the pressure will ease because it's no longer such a big story. You're 18 or in your early 20s. It doesn't really make that much of a difference anymore. You're now part of the established squad and you're treated as an adult and you need to deliver. And I think he's got potential, but I'm not sure he's a world-class player. I think he's a little bit small for a striker. He is fast, but not crazy fast. He has a wonderful shot, but he works better as a second striker. Than a second striker needs to play in a system where there's a striker ahead of you, so that kind of limits your possibilities. Otherwise, you have to play through the wings, and that's also not his greatest. So I think he will continue to develop and continue to become better, as you do when you get more experience. But I wouldn't see him necessarily as a key player for Germany going into the Euros, which begs the question, who's going to be that centre forward that they need? Will it be Niklas Füllkrug? Hard to say, but I think some of the lessons we've learned in recent years is perhaps that having a striker is better than no striker, even if that striker isn't quite at the level of the players around him. But again, Flick, I think, still seems to be a little bit undecided, and we'll have to see what happens there.
So I'm going to use my last question to maybe shame Eddie a little bit. So we had talked at the beginning of the Premier League season about Haaland coming to City and whether he would push to break the scoring record for the Premier League. Eddie was adamantly against it. Now, someone who obviously covers Bundesliga very well, you've seen him play quite often.
In his first season.
You're done.
I want to clarify.
You had your question. So going into this season, what expectations did you have of Haaland and how he would play at City, and would he make a push for breaking the scoring record or something like that?
I wasn't thinking of him in terms of breaking the scoring record, but I had no doubt that he was going to just score ridiculous amounts of goals. But the question is, does he help City to go one step further and win the Champions League? Because if he doesn't, and if they don't win the league, then it's strange. He will be voted the player of the season, but perhaps having had the impact for his team that people expected. So it's a really strange one. But yeah, the guy will score goals in any team, any league, anywhere. Doesn't really matter. I think City, by and large, have adjusted well to playing slightly differently with him. He might still make the difference. He might still be the missing ingredient in winning the Champions League, and then everyone say it's a stroke of genius. If he doesn't, then the question marks will continue, but they will not point at him. They will point at Pep. For some reason, not quite getting it right. But yeah, Haaland is a freak. Haaland is a generational centre forward, and he will function well in any team, in any setup.
Well, there we go. Maybe that's a good way to end, and we can see what ends up happening with City and Bayern Munich, I suppose, based on and even Liverpool for the remainder of the season. But yeah, Raph, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and some really interesting insights into German football and the German team overall as well.
Thanks for having me.